leave a sandal outside on Friday night, and they would go outside on Saturday, and they would pick it up, and they would throw it, and they would go anywhere they wanted to go. Because they figured out how to get around the law. See, the law makes people want to rebel. I promise you, if some of you would go to an ultra-conservative Christian college that told you you couldn't have a beard, you'd want a beard for the first time in your life. My son asked me a couple months ago, he says, "Dad, why are you growing your goatee back?" I said, "Because I can." Couldn't have a goatee at Publix. Can't have any facial hair. You can have a mustache, but not past the corners of your mouth. It's just rule. See, the law, in a weird way, it gives us a foundation, but it also causes people to want to rebel. And so the Hebrews figured out how to get around it by leaving a sandal out in the yard. One of the rules was, if you have an ox that has fallen in a well on the Sabbath, you can't do anything about it until the next day. And a kid in my youth group said, "Well, why don't you just throw your sandal in and go get them both?" If you go right now to Israel, they have what's called Sabbath elevators. That when you get in, the elevator stops at floors 2, 4, 6, and 8 on the way up, and on the way down, it stops at 7, 5, 3, and 1. And it's so you don't have to push the button and do work on the Sabbath. You were allowed to spit on the Sabbath, but only on a rock. Because they determined that if you spit in the dirt, just the fact that the dirt would turn to mud was work. That's why when Jesus spit in the dirt and made mud and wiped it on the guy's eyes on the Sabbath, he did 3 things you can't do. He spit in the dirt, then he worked, and he healed on the Sabbath. The rule was if somebody was sick on the Sabbath that you could wrap it in a bandage, but it couldn't have medicine on it because the medicine would do work. Listen, it's no different in 2008. We've got our set of rules that we think Christians do and don't do. The Church of God, which is the group we're a part of. My father pastored the oldest Church of God in the movement. D.S. Warner, who is the founder of the Church of God, planted my dad's church. Okay? People in my church knew Danny Warner. I mean, I can tell you stories. Get this. When the Church of God started, and some of you will be happy, you couldn't wear a necktie. Because neckties were sinful. You could not have buttons. You had to have snaps because buttons were too decorative and they were showy. You couldn't drink coffee or tea. You better back off now, DS. Why? Because it had caffeine in it and caffeine was a drug. Here's one of my favorites. You couldn't have mustard. In the Church of God, you were not allowed to have mustard. Why? Because mustard went on hot dogs. And hot dogs were associated with picnics. And picnics were associated with beer. And so you didn't get to have mustard. I'm telling you the truth. That was one of the rules. And so what does that make you want to do? Go get a hot dog and put some mustard on is what it does. The fact is this. We've got our set of rules. And our rules don't matter. I grew up in West Michigan. Christian Reformed, Dutch Reformed land. Okay? They don't eat out on Sunday. They don't take the paper on Sunday because it makes people work on the Sabbath. But they have smoking rooms in their church. So, at my church, what they're doing is sinful, and at their church, what I'm doing is sinful, but the truth is, probably neither of them really matter. I got real quiet in here real fast. No, the point is that we've got our set of rules of what we think Christians do and don't do. Now, I think there are certain things in terms of modesty, and there are certain activities that Christians ought to avoid. Like murder would be one. Okay? But my point is that it's really no different. We not only have an oral law, we have a written law in 2008. And what Jesus wants to say is, the law has already been fulfilled, and I'm going to show you that. It was the scribes who created the rules, not God. Not God. The Pharisees, which actually means the separated ones, were a different group than the scribes. The Pharisees were a group of men, only men, who decided they were going to live up to all these laws. That's how they were going to prove that they loved God and how holy they were. Now, for many, many, many years, the scribal law was not written down. It was actually communicated by story. Now, have you ever played the game Telephone, where there's only like 12 of you in a circle? You know, and you start off with, you know, the brown fox jumped over the road, and by the time it gets around, the peanut butter ate the rubber ball. You know, I mean, they're not... So you can imagine that after several hundred years that this really, really got messed up. It was in the 3rd century AD, it was finally put into a book called the Mishnah. It was codified. What we mean by code is it was divided into subjects. It has 63 different subjects, and in English, typed out, it is 800 pages long. It is the Orlando Yellow Pages twice of rules. I want to try. That doesn't even sound like fun. But somebody took the time to write all that out. To an Orthodox Jew, these rules were a big deal. In fact, they take it very seriously, even to this day. It was a matter of life and death. Now here's the part for Jesus. In terms of fulfilling the law, Jesus was not referring to these laws when he said that he came to fulfill that law, because he broke those same laws himself. He did say he came to fulfill it, but what he meant was he came to give the law real meaning. To Jews, in their passion, they had figured out the great principle of God, but they didn't grasp it very well. So what is God's plan? This is the part they had right. In everything, man should seek God's will and dedicate themselves to living that way. That's what the rules were about. This is God's will. This is how you should live. But the part that they messed up was that in their man-made rules became more important than God's rule. So what's the principle that Jesus came to fulfill? It's a great song. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. That's what the law was about. It was about respect and about honor. You see, the 10 Commandments, the Big 10, they're about respecting God, respecting the name of God, respecting His day, respecting your parents, respecting life and property and people's personalities, and respecting truth and another person's good name, and respecting yourself. That's what the 10 Commandments are about. That's the principle. Jesus is trying to get us to respect that. Respect and honor is what Christ came to show us. The Greeks had a really good saying. It said, justice is giving to God and men which is their due. Justice is when we give to people what is their due. And Jesus came to show us what justice really looks like. Not what we think it's like, but what it should look like. He came to show us that reverence is not shown by obeying a group of rules. Justice is shown by mercy. It's shown by love and not legalism. Justice focuses not on the negatives, but it focuses on the positives. See, there's a great way that you can encourage your children by saying positive what you want them to avoid negatively. And for the Jews, they figured out all the things they shouldn't do. Jesus is coming to try to show, look at all the things you can do. I have a friend who is a hemophiliac, and ultimately he died of AIDS because of a blood transfusion. And when Richard was a boy, his parents got a list of things from the doctor that he wasn't allowed to do. Not allowed to swim, not allowed to play basketball, not allowed this, not allowed that, not allowed that. And I remember before Richard died, he showed me the new booklet that came out, and it was all filled with all the things you kids can do. Instead of focusing on the negatives, focus on the positives. That's what Jesus came to try to do for us. See, in the beginning, there had to be a law before we could have the gospel. There had to be something to be trapped by in order to be set free from. And men had to figure out the difference between right and wrong. And we thought we had it figured out, and Jesus came to show us a different way. And it's become part of life for you and me, where we blame the past for what's wrong today. And sometimes that's true. And I think there are some things we can look back and go, wow, how did we end up in 2008 where we are? Well, it's because of decisions that were made back in 1960. Okay, I can understand that. But there are certain parts of moving forward that we should value the past as well. Because there are lessons that we learned. I go to the airport. When I used to speak, I would walk into the airport and